I want to be honest about something. The skills that made me able to make consistent 20K per month are not the ones I spend most of my career developing. And they're not the ones you're going to hear about in most copywriting courses either. I'm going to walk you over through exactly what they are, the logic behind why they work, and most importantly, why people in this space never develop them even though they're the most important thing. But for you to get to the point that I am at right now, you need to understand the real story behind me getting into copywriting and what made me realize that no matter how good I get, there would still be an income ceiling that I would be stuck at. So 2 years back, when I got into copywriting, the thing that genuinely excited me was how much sense it made as a skill. Because since businesses run when people buy, and if your job is to convince people to buy, you're getting your hands into something that could never die, and there would always be someone that would work with you. So I went deep into it. I studied the fundamentals, I practiced constantly, and over time, I genuinely got good. Clients started coming through, the results were solid, and the referrals started happening. And for a while, I felt like everything was going the way it was supposed to. But here's what started to bother me. As my skills started to improve, the results I was producing for my clients were getting bigger. The campaigns that used to generate $50,000 were now generating $200,000 or even $300,000. So the quality of the work was clearly better, and so were the outcomes. But when I looked at my own income over the same period, it hadn't moved anywhere close to that. Because the gap between the value I was creating for my clients versus what I was getting paid was getting wider. And I remember sitting with that and genuinely not being able to explain that situation. So I did what most people in this situation would do. I assumed I just needed to push harder, take on more clients, deliver bigger, and eventually the income would catch up with the work. I mean, that is what I thought was the answer, but I was dead wrong. But eventually, I understood that what was happening, because I want you to think about a chef who joins a restaurant and creates a dish that people starts to show up. It gets written about, talked about, shared online. The restaurant builds its entire identity around it. Now, they can confidently raise their prices and expand their business because that one dish generated millions in revenue over the years. And with time, the chef's salary goes up, but it's nowhere near to what the dish actually generated in the name of that restaurant. And most of the profit is taken home by the owner, even though he doesn't know how to cook a fucking thing. But since he owns the system, which is the restaurant itself, the chef's skill flows into that system and turns it into something that the owner can scale and build an empire around. And the better the chef gets, the more valuable the owner's business becomes and the more he earns. Now, this is precisely what was happening to me as a copywriter. The better I got, the more valuable the campaigns I was producing. But I was getting paid for the deliverable, the emails, the landing page, the sequence, not for what those deliverables actually generated. And the thing that makes this so hard to recognize when you're inside it is that every improvement you make feels like progress. Every good results feels like you're moving forward, but you're making progress within a model that has a structural limit. And that limit has nothing to do with how hard you work and how much money you make for your clients. So the question I eventually had to sit was with this. If getting better at copy isn't what changes my income, then what does? And the answer to that question came from the specific moment that I didn't expect. So, short story, I was on a call with this client and the results were getting consistently good and they trusted me. But in the middle of the call, they started walking through a problem that they were genuinely stuck on. Their launch had done well, numbers were up, revenue came in, but some weeks after, the lead quality had dropped. Conversion rates were falling and their ad costs were climbing without a reason. They'd been staring at the data, trying to figure out what was actually going on, and they couldn't figure it out. And I sat there on a call, having absolutely nothing to say about how to solve the problem because I didn't have enough skills to actually diagnose those problems. And at that time, I couldn't say much except for offering them a new email sequence. And what struck me about that moment wasn't embarrassing. It was clarity. Because I realized that what this client actually needed right now wasn't better copy. It was someone who could look at his whole system and could tell him where the problem was and how to fix it. And unfortunately, I wasn't that person. Not yet. I got off the call and started to ask myself that how do these businesses actually work? Why wasn't I able to solve the problem that my client had? And what are those other skills that I need to learn in order for me to solve these problems for my clients? And then I started doing my research, digging deep in to find the answers to these questions. And based on that research, I found out that there are two layers to basically becoming useful to a business. There's the execution layer and then there's a diagnostic layer. Execution layer is where you execute tasks and get you caught. Whereas diagnostic layer is where you can look at the exact problem of your clients, tell them why they're happening, and then work with them to solve those problems and scale their business. Now, listen to this carefully. Most copywriters live entirely in the execution layer, which is something, and there's nothing wrong in that, but that is also the reason as to why you hit an income ceiling and can't scale past it. Because the execution layer, although it's important too, but it's also completely dependent on someone else giving you a brief where you're showing up when you're called, like an employee. It's just as when you learn the difference between a pharmacist and a doctor. A pharmacist knows better medication than almost everyone. You walk in with a prescription and they fill it with total precision. That's execution. But the doctor is the person who figured out what was the problem in the first place. They diagnosed it before anyone could prescribe anything. And since most copywriters are pharmacists, the shift I had to make was developing the diagnostic skills, which means understanding how traffic flows and why quality shifts, understanding why offers convert at completely different rates to different audiences, understanding where funnels lose people and what each drop off point actually tells you about the business. And the moment I made this shift and actually learned the skills that supported these levers, my entire life had flipped around. Now, when you do develop these diagnostic skills, you not only become more useful to the business, but you also create independency. And independency is what determines income at the highest level in this industry. Think about it practically. If you could write great emails, a client could find someone else who also write great emails. But if you control their business growth, then clients would be dependent on you to grow their business. And letting go of you would also mean losing that tens of hundreds of millions of dollars that you would help them make by growing their business. And they would not make the expensive mistake of losing you. So to go back to what I said in the start, the skills that made me able to cross past 20K per month weren't advanced copywriting techniques. They were strategic skills that got me a solid grip on those insanely important levers of a business that I discussed before in this video. Now, copy is still the central to everything I do, and personally I think it's one of the most important foundations you can have, but it's a foundation, not the full structure. And the moment I started treating it that way, that's where my income increased. And if you're a copywriter right now who's putting in the work and struggling to scale your income, it's time for you to stop being a pharmacist and start being a doctor. Now, that's what I've got everything in this one. And if this changed something in how you think about your career, I think this video did its job. See you in the next one.